today just looking at the basics of Airtable. So we're going to look at what is a base and what are tables. I'm going to talk you through the different tables that I've set up in my base, which is called Fibre, and some of the basic field types and sorting and filtering and views. So first of all, what is a base in Airtable? So you can think of a base as the equivalent of what Ravelry would call your notebook. So it is the overall thing which houses all of the subsections of things that you want to record. And then within that we have tables, which are all of these tabs here. So we have Yarn and Stash, Projects, Queue, Library, Future Plans, which for me is a little bit like Favorites, Needles, Hooks, Interchangeable, Cables, Project Yarn, which we'll come back to in the second video, Fibre Stash, and Spinning Projects. So I've structured this fairly similar to the sections that you would see in Ravelry. So if we look at Yarn and Stash first of all, you can see here that I've got quite a visual output. It is quite similar to what you would again see in Ravelry, and I'm achieving that by using the gallery view. So if I switch it to grid view, you'll see that this looks more like just a spreadsheet with all of the columns of data. But I think it's just quite nice to have it in this gallery view, which is obviously headed by the image that you upload. You can choose which fields you want to appear, which things are most important to you in this view. So for me, obviously I have the base, the brand, how many grams remaining, the yarn status, which is a field we'll come back to later, and the colorway. If I want to see more about this record, I can just click on it and it brings up the full record. You have a little pane over here which shows you revision activity if that's useful to you. I don't really use it that much. And then you can see all of the fields going down here. So we have the ones which you can see on the main card at the top. So we have the yarn name, the base, the brand, remaining grams, yarn status, and colorway. And then we have 23 hidden fields here. So at the moment this is expanded. You can minimize and that will hide all of those. But here you can see we have the weight, grams per skein, yards per skein, meters per skein, how many skeins I have. And these are all formula fields which are calculating based on the numbers that we have up here, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a bit. Die lot, if it was relevant, if I have it. A lot of mine I haven't actually got this filled in. Purchase date and purchased at. Because I imported all my data from Ravelry, these are fields that I decided to keep, but obviously not necessarily that relevant. Comments, image, which I've uploaded, and you can attach images in various different ways. And then we have some linked fields. So we'll look at linked fields in a bit more detail in the next video, but essentially this is a way to link different records that are stored in the different tables. So here you can see I've linked it to a record in my queue for the project that I want to use this yarn in. Grams used in projects, there's nothing here at the moment because I haven't used this yarn yet, but we'll have a look and see how that works in the next video as well. Total grams and total grams used, and we have a few other fields down here like will, trade, or sell, which is a simple tick box, and other linked records which are not applicable yet. So you can see there's quite a lot of room to save a lot of data. If I go to projects, you'll see I have another different view again. So this one is called the Kanban view. Again, if I change it back to grid view, you'll see it looks very, very similar. You've got basically a normal sort of spreadsheet setup. But with Kanban view, I have it so that it is stacked by status. So you can choose particular field types to group by in this view. And in my case, I think this is quite useful to stack by status. There's always this uncategorized on the left, but you can always just minimize that. So I have obviously in progress, finished, gifted, and donated if there was items that I've given which were not necessarily gifts, but for example, I've donated to charity shop. Queue, again, quite a visual format. I'm using the gallery view again for my queue. And again, some key data at the top, the pattern name, the designer, the yarn I want to use, and the colorways of that yarn, and then a cast on start project button, which we will look at in the third video I'm going to do. You'll also see that these are numbered. So this field type is called an auto number, and it will basically, every time I add something to my queue, it will give it the next sequential number in the queue. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite as nicely as Ravelry in terms of moving entries around and renumbering them. It is possible to do it, but it's not as tidy, and I haven't found a way to do that yet. Library I have in grid view because this isn't a view that I would necessarily be looking at all that often, and it's something that I'm more likely, if I want to look for a particular pattern or see what I have, for example, if I want to find a hat pattern, then I would just be filtering this view. So I've left this one in a grid view. Future plans is back in gallery view again. I'm using this as a kind of mini favourites. So these are patterns which I really like, and I think I almost certainly will knit in the future, or maybe I've even got yarn ideas for them. But I haven't yet got the pattern in my library, so they haven't quite made it to queue status yet. But they're things that I want to make sure I have a note of and don't forget about over time. Needles, hooks, and interchangeable cables are all in grid view because, again, usually I'm not necessarily looking at these too much. They are just holding data which is being pulled onto other tables, which we'll see later. I have a couple of fields over here which tells me which projects I have used these needles or cables in. And also this lookup field has a condition on it so that it will only put something in here if the project status is still active. So that tells me which projects those needles are actually in use in at the moment. And we'll have a look at the formula for that in the next video. Then I'm going to skip over project yarn and we'll come back to that. And then I have fibre stash, which is very much like my yarn stash, and spinning projects, which is very much like my other projects. Obviously I have different fields on some of these, which are not necessarily relevant to yarn, but might be more relevant to fibre. So what kind of fibre preparation it is, the fibre content percentages, and this one I just have a simple whether or not it's used. I'll tick the box because usually I will use all of the fibre in one spinning project, so it doesn't need to be as complex as the one on yarn. So if I go back to yarn in stash, we can have a look at some of the field types, and this will probably be a little bit easier if I go back to grid view. So if we start at the beginning, the brand and base fields are a single select field type. So if I click on this little drop down arrow and go to customize field type, we can see the type is single select. And as you can see here, that says it allows you to select a single option from predefined options in a drop down. So this is quite useful for things like things which are constant or regularly repeating, like brands, base types, and you can see over here the weight, so whether it's fingering or sport or DK is the same type of field. So we have all of these ones that I've added, and if I needed a new one I could add an option using this this option here and type it in. Or indeed, if I'm just adding a record to this view, as I'm adding it I can type a new entry and it will add it to the list. And as I'm typing, if it recognises it matches, or it thinks it matches something that's already in the list, it will prompt that. So this kind of helps with some consistency in the way that you're entering the data, and it also speeds things up. Colorway is just a single line text field because obviously that's going to be completely different depending on the yarn. Image is just a field, it's an attachment field, so you can see here as I'm hovering over it, it's got an option to add another attachment, and you can drag and drop files. You can also link to Dropbox, or you can pull from Instagram or from a URL. So if you go to the yarn store page and take it from there, you can take the image from there as well. Weight is a single select, as we were talking about before. You can see these ones I've got coloured. That's just a visual option that you can choose when you customize the field. You can toggle this coloured options on and off. These are all formula fields, as you can see with the FX formula symbol. So essentially these are all calculating based on other fields that are further in the table. So if I go here, you can see the formula. So this is saying take the value from the column called remaining grams and divide it by the value from the column grams per skein. So that is auto calculating how many skeins I have left, and it's the number is going to come out as a decimal, and you can change the precision here. These all pretty much work the same way. So this one is take the value in total grams column and subtract the value in total grams used column. Remaining meters and remaining yards, they work the same way. The total grams used column is a sum of all of the values in grams used in projects. This sounds a little bit complicated, but it's really not too bad. And a lot of this is just pulling data automatically, so it's not like you have to fill in a bunch of numbers. The ones that you will have to fill in when you are creating a new entry are these ones. These are just plain number entry fields, so they're not calculating anything. You just have to input a number. So we have grams per skein, yards per skein, meters per skein, number of skeins that you have. Then again, we come back to some formulas. So total yards, we'll take the number in yards per skein and multiply it by the number in skeins. So this is all, the same kind of calculations that your Ravelry stash page would do. It's just that you are kind of seeing the calculations behind it. Total meters, total grams works exactly the same way. Dilot, another text field. Purchase date is a date field, so pretty much what you would expect, and you can set different date formats depending on where you are. Comments, this is a long text field. So whereas text is just single line of text, comments, long text is better for if you want to add more detail and more text. Will trade or sell is just a checkbox, so if I hover over, this box appears and I could click to tick it to say I would be willing to trade or sell that yarn. Queue and projects, grams used in projects, project yarn, these are all lookup and linked fields, which we will look at in more detail in the next video, but essentially these are the way that you link records on different tables in your database. So this would be like, this works exactly the same way as in Ravelry. If you add something to your queue and you say I'm using this yarn from my stash, or I will use this yarn from my stash, same with the projects. Grams used in projects is a lookup field, so that's going to a different table and looking up data. Yarn status, this one's another formula field, so that it will automatically update the yarn status based the yarn status value, so not used, partially used, or all used, which is which you can filter out. It will automatically update that status based on the quantity I have left. And spinning project is another linked record. So if I have one of my handspan, for example, I've linked to the spinning project that created that yarn. If I go to the filter, I can add a filter, and I can say I want to filter where yarn status is not all used. And this won't look much different, but it did actually filter something out there. At least one thing. I'll go back to gallery view. If I go to projects, again, for a bit ease, I'll change it back to grid view. We can see that I've got quite similar things, similar types of fields. So we have another single select for the status. This is a linked field to patterns in my library. These fields are looking up data based on what is in the pattern field. So these pre-fill as soon as you pull in the pattern. The same happens when I link to the record in my yarn stash that I'm using for this project. It will automatically look up and pull through the colorways. Needles and cable and hooks are all linked fields as well. Stitch gauge and row gauge, these are just numeric entry fields. Gauge size, that's another single select. So the options I have is 1 inch by 1 inch or 4 inch by 4 inch. Gauge pattern is a text field, so stockinette or garter or whatever that would be. Start dates and finish dates, again date fields. Size is a free text field because that can vary quite a lot depending on what the project is. Total yarn used is a formula calculation again. So that's summing all of the values in the quantity used lookup field, which is this one over here. Again, we have long form notes and an image field for the project image. You can upload multiple images as well. A link to my blog, so if I've written up a blog entry for this project. And this one is another automatic button for populating the junction table, which we will look at in a later video. The queue works much the same way, so we have a linked field to pattern that pulls automatically the designer name. We have a linked field to select what yarns I want to use, which automatically pulls the colorways. These automatically pull the craft and the pattern category from the library. Same with the image, that also pulls through from the library. And the weight of yarn. And then we have free text fields here and the pattern name.